Please let us in.
You are now entering Clearview, Illinois. The name of tonight's story is The Knock at Midnight. The wind howled through the barren trees, sending dry leaves skittering across the cracked pavement like whispers from something unseen. The houses in the neighborhood were all dark now, their porch lights flickered out one by one, signaling that Halloween was officially over. But not for Jenna. She was the last house on the block, and she always kept a bowl of candy on the table near the door, just in case a late trick-or-treater knocked. Tonight, though, something felt different. The streets outside were eerily quiet. The usual giggles and shouts of costumed children had long faded, replaced by an unnerving silence that settled in her bones. Jenna was about to turn off the last light when there was a soft knock at the door. She froze, hand still hovering above the lamp switch, straining to listen. Knock, 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 knock. It wasn't the hurried pounding of an excited child, nor the casual rap of a neighbor. It was slow, deliberate, insistent. She glanced at the clock. It was just after midnight. Who would be out trick-or-treating at this hour? Through the peephole, she saw two children standing on her porch, their backs turned to her, as if they were waiting for something. They were dressed in old-fashioned clothes, like from another time. No costumes, no pumpkin buckets, just standing there with their heads slightly bowed, as if they were whispering to each other. A chill crawled up Jenna's spine. She opened the door a crack. "Can I help you?" The children turned slowly, their faces pale and emotionless. But it was their eyes that made her heart skip a beat. They were pure black, no whites, no irises, just two dark voids staring back at her.
Please let us in,
the tall one whispered, his voice like the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. Jenna's hand gripped the door tighter. The air around her seemed to thicken, pressing in, making it hard to breathe.
Let us in,
the girl echoed, her voice strangely flat, lifeless. They didn't move closer. They didn't blink. They just stood there, waiting. Jenna's breath caught in her throat. The air seemed colder now, biting her skin even though the door was barely open. Every instinct screamed at her to shut the door, to bolt it and walk away. But there was something about the children, those eyes that kept her rooted in place, as if an invisible thread was pulling her towards them. She tried to sound firm, but her voice wavered. "It's late. You should be home." The taller boy tilted his head slightly, his lips curled into a thin smile.
"We don't have a home."
His voice was soft, almost mechanical, as if it had been practice, the words foreign to him. The girl beside him blinked slowly, her dark eyes reflecting nothing but the porch light above.
"Please, let us in. We're so cold."
Jenna's fingers tightened around the edge of the door, her mind racing. Every warning she'd ever heard about strangers rang in her ears. But these weren't strangers, at least not in the usual sense. Something about them felt wrong, out of place. Their clothes, their voices, those eyes, something about them was unnatural. "I can't let you in," Jenna finally managed to say, forcing her voice to be steady. The boy took a small step forward, his shoes barely making a sound on the wooden porch.
"We won't hurt you. We just need to come inside."
Jenna felt her throat tighten. There was no emotion in his voice, no desperation. Just the same cold, flat insistence. She tried to look past them to see if there were any other kids, maybe an adult hiding nearby, playing a prank, but the streets were empty and the wind seemed to howl louder, as if urging her to make a decision. "I'm sorry," she whispered and started to close the door, but the girl reached out, her small hand pressing against the door frame. Her skin was icy, far too cold for someone who had been standing outside for only a few minutes. Jenna recoiled instinctively, stepping back from the door. The girl's eyes seemed to darken, the void in them deepening.
"Please,"
she whispered again, her tone lower, almost pleading.
"We need to come in."
Jenna shook her head, her heart racing. No! The boy's smile faded, his face growing even paler, if that were possible.
If you don't let us in, you will regret it.
A chill ran down Jenna's spine. There was no anger in his words, just a simple statement of fact, like he was informing her of something inevitable. But that calmness terrified her more than anything. The girl's hand slipped from the door frame, and they both took a step back in unison, their faces emotionless once more.
We'll be back,
the boy said softly. Then, without another word, they turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows beyond the streetlight. Jenna slammed the door shut, her hands trembling. She locked it, checked it twice, then stumbled back into the living room, her heart pounding in her chest for a moment. She just stood there. Jenna stood frozen in her living room, her pulse thundered in her ears. She kept her eyes on the door, half expecting the children to return, their hollow eyes staring through the window, demanding to be let in. She grabbed her phone from the coffee table, her hand shaking as she dialed her best friend, Alice. The phone rang once, then twice. Each ring seemed to echo louder in the quiet house. On the fourth ring, Alice picked up. "Jen!" Alice's voice was groggy with sleep. "It's past midnight. What's going on?" Jenna swallowed hard, her mouth dry. She struggled to find the words. "Alice, something knocked on my door." "Yeah, it's Halloween. Probably some teenagers pulling a prank." Alice's voice sounded more awake now, but still unconcerned. "What did they do? Egg your house?" "No," Jenna whispered, her eyes darting towards the front window. "It wasn't like that. They were kids, but there was something wrong with them." Silence hung on the line for a beat too long. "What do you mean, wrong?" Alice asked cautiously. Jenna opened her mouth trying to explain, but the words felt ridiculous. How could she tell her friend that two children with eyes as black as a moonless sky had stood on her porch asking to be let in? That their voices felt like they were peeling away the layers of her sanity. "They had black eyes, Alice," Jenna finally said, her voice barely audible. Alice let out a soft chuckle. "Black eyes? Like those urban legends? You've been watching too many horror movies." Jenna's chest tightened with frustration. "No, Alice, I'm serious. They were at my door. They wanted to come in. And you didn't let them, right?" "No, of course not. But they said they'd come back." Alice sighed, her tone softened. "Jen, listen to me. You're probably just spooked. It's Halloween. People do weird things. Just lock your doors, turn on a movie, and get some sleep. There's nothing to worry about." Jenna nodded, even though Alice couldn't see her. "Yeah, maybe you're right. Call me in the morning, okay? We'll laugh about this over coffee." Jenna agreed, feeling the smallest flicker of relief. After she hung up, she double-checked the locks on the doors and windows, then curled up on the couch. The TV flickered with static in the background. Hours passed. The house was silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the occasional creak of the old wooden floorboards. Jenna's eyelids grew heavy, her mind clouded with exhaustion. Tap, tap, tap. Her eyes snapped open. The sound was faint, barely audible, but unmistakable. Someone was tapping on the front window. Jenna sat upright, her heart pounding in her throat. She stared at the window, dread crawling up her spine. The curtains were drawn, blocking the view, but she knew who was out there. Slowly, Jenna stood and moved towards the window, every step feeling heavier than the last. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. Tap, tap, tap. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the curtain, pulling it back enough to peek through. They were there. The two children stood on the lawn, illuminated only by the pale moonlight. They were facing the house, heads tilted, eyes wide and black, empty. Jenna stumbled back, her breath catching in her throat. They hadn't knocked on the door this time. They were just waiting. The boy stepped forward, his lips parting in a cold smile. Though she couldn't hear his voice through the glass, Jenna could see his lips from the words, clear as day.
Let us in.
Panic surged through her. She bolted towards the kitchen, grabbing a knife from the drawer. What was she going to do? Call the police? Tell them two strange children were standing outside her house, demanding to be let in? As her thoughts raced, the tapping began again, this time at the back door. Jenna froze, knife gripped tightly in her hand. The air in the room felt thick, oppressive, as though the walls themselves were closing in. Slowly, she turned towards the back door. The girl stood there now, her small hand pressed against the glass, her eyes, those awful empty eyes, staring right at her.
We're not going to hurt you,
the girl whispered, her voice muffled through the door.
But we need to come in. Let us in.
Jenna shook her head violently, backing away. Go away, she shouted, her voice hoarse. The girl's face didn't change, still calm, emotionless.
We'll wait. You'll let us in eventually.
The boy was at the front door again now, his hand resting on the handle. He gave it a slow, deliberate twist, testing it. The lock held, but Jenna could see his smile growing wider, as though he knew something she didn't.
We'll wait,
the girl echoed softly from behind the door. Jenna's heart raced as she backed into the corner of the kitchen, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The tapping on the glass continued, rhythmic and patient, as if they had all the time in the world. Jenna pressed herself tighter into the corner of the kitchen, her knuckles white around the knife handle. Her breaths were shallow, uneven, her heart racing like a drumbeat in her chest. The tapping at the door stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that made the hair on her arm stand up. Just as she dared to take a step towards the living room, she heard it, a soft, lilting melody carried on the wind like a distant lullaby. At first, it was faint, almost too quiet to make out, but then the words became clearer, floating through the thin walls of the house.
Hush now, don't you cry. We are here and so close by. Let us in, and you will see how safe and warm we'll always be.
Jenna froze. The voices were high-pitched, childlike, but there was something deeply wrong about them, something hollow, devoid of life. The song continued, now from both the front and the back of the house, their vocals weaving together in a sickening harmony.
We come in peace, we mean no harm. We'll take you gently by the arm. The night is long, the dark is deep. Let us in and fall asleep.
Tears pricked at the corners of Jenna's eyes. The melody was hypnotic, wrapping around her like a fog, tugging at her exhaustion and fear. She shook her head, trying to block out the sound, but it crawled under her skin, digging into her thoughts.
Let us in, we'll keep you near. There's nothing left for you to fear. Just open up and then we'll stay until the night takes you away.
The last line hung in the air, thick and menacing. The children had stopped moving, standing still in the pale moonlight, their black eyes locked on the house, waiting. Jenna stumbled back into the kitchen counter, her breath coming in ragged gasp. The song had stopped, but its chilling melody lingered, echoing in her mind. It was as though they had stitched it into the very air around her, wrapping her tighter in their invisible grasp. Her phone buzzed on the counter, startling her. She glanced at the screen. It was Alice. With trembling hands, she picked it up, desperate for the sound of another human voice. Alice, they're still here, she whispered into the phone, tears choking her voice. They're singing, they're trying to get in. But instead of Alice's comforting voice, she heard something else.
We come in peace, we mean no harm.
Her blood turned to ice. The children's song was coming through the phone. Jenna dropped the phone as if it had burned her, the children's haunting melody still ringing in her ears. Now, not just outside, but inside her home, through her phone, through Alice's voice. The realization crashed over her like ice water. They could reach her anywhere. The house seemed to grow smaller, the walls pressing in, the darkness creeping closer as if it had a life of its own. She backed away from the phone, her eyes darting from the window to the doors. How long had she been standing there, paralyzed by the song? She didn't know. Time felt slippery, warped in the suffocating atmosphere the children had brought with them. Suddenly, the tapping started again, louder this time, more crazed. Tap, tap, tap! From the front door, the back door, the windows, a chorus of knocking surrounded her, filling the house with an unrelenting rhythm, like a heartbeat growing stronger, faster. Tap, tap, tap!
We know you can hear us,
The boy's voice whispered, barely more than a breath, but clear. It seemed to come from all around her.
We know you're scared.
The girl added, her voice now just outside the kitchen window. Jenna whirled towards the sound, clutching the knife so tightly her fingers hurt. Through the thin curtains, she could see the faint outlines of their small faces, those dark, empty eyes peering in, waiting for her to make a move.
We are so cold.
The boy said again.
Please, let us in.
Her body trembled, but she shook her head, though no one could see it. No, you're not coming in. Silence. The tapping stopped, as if her words had frozen the world. Then, through the oppressive quiet, their voices rose again, this time in a chilling, drawn-out chant.
Hush now, don't you cry. We will find you by and by.
They were closer now, somehow. She could feel them, as if they were right next to her, breathing down her neck. Jenna's legs buckled, and she sank to the floor. The knife slipped from her grip. Her mind was unraveling, the terror so deep it felt like it was suffocating her. Their voices slithered into her thoughts, filling every corner of her mind.
Let us in and you will see.
You can never run from me. She squeezed her eyes shut, covering her ears with both hands. Go away, she screamed, her voice cracking. Just leave me alone. For a moment, there was silence again, but it didn't feel like relief. It felt like the air before a storm, thick and heavy, waiting for something far worse. When Jenna opened her eyes, the boy was standing in the middle of the living room. His black eyes gleamed in the dim light, reflecting nothing, voids that seemed to pull the light from the room. The girl appeared next to him, her cold, pale hands reaching towards Jenna.
Let us in,
the boy said softly. His smile returned wider now, more menacing.
It's easier if you let us in.
Jenna scrambled back, her breath coming in gasps. She blinked, her mind fighting the image in front of her. They couldn't be inside. The doors were locked. The windows were closed. But there they stood, as real as the shadows around them, watching her. Go away, she whispered, her voice hoarse, broken. You're not real. The girl tilted her head, a small frown tugging at her lips.
But we are, Jenna. We're as real as the dark outside.
She took another step forward, her black eyes narrowing.
And we always find a way in.
Jenna felt the walls closing in around her, her vision blurring with the weight of her terror. The boy knelt down beside her, his cold breath brushing her cheek as he leaned closer.
We told you we'd wait.
With a final, slow blink, Jenna realized the truth, the thing she had been running from since the first knock at the door. They had already been let in. Jenna's mind was a storm, her thoughts crashing into each other like waves in the dark. The boy's cold breath lingered on her cheek, his presence far too close. She wanted to scream, to fight, to run, but her body wouldn't obey. She was trapped, locked in place by the weight of their gaze. The girl crouched beside her, her icy fingers brushing Jenna's hand.
It's time, Jenna. You've been alone for so long. We'll take care of you now.
Jenna shook her head weakly, her voice barely a whisper. No, no. But the children only smiled, their faces so pale, so devoid of life, their eyes, those deep black pits, bore into her, dragging her down into the abyss with them. The boy reached out and took her hand, his grip cold and final.
Don't worry,
He whispered.
it's easier this way.
Jenna's vision blurred, her senses growing dull. The room spun, the shadows stretching and warping, swallowing her whole. She felt her body slipping, fading, as if something inside her was being drained, something essential, something that made her Jenna. Her last thought before everything went dark was how cold the boy's hand was, icy to say the least. The next morning, the neighborhood was quiet. The early morning sun cast a soft golden glow over the sleepy street. The house that had been so full of tension the night before now stood still, silent, as though nothing had ever been wrong. But inside, the air was thick with a different kind of stillness. Jenna stood by the front window, her face expressionless, her hands hanging limply by her side. Her eyes, once filled with warmth and fear, were now black, deep voids of nothingness, just like the children's. She blinked slowly, staring out into the street. Unseen, her lips parted slightly as if she were listening to something far away. The two children stood beside her, one on each side, their small hands loosely gripping hers. They didn't smile. They didn't need to. Their empty eyes gleamed with something dark, something far beyond human comprehension. Together they stared out into the street, waiting. Jenna's mouth moved, barely forming the words, her voice flat, cold. "Let us in." The echo of their song lingered in the air, quiet but haunting, as they watched the world pass by. The three of them stood there, motionless, silent spirits, their black eyes always waiting. You are now exiting Clearview, Illinois city limits. I hope you enjoyed the trip. Like and subscribe.
Let us in. Hush now, don't you cry. We are here and so close by. Let us in and you will see how safe and warm we'll always be. We come in peace, we mean no harm. We'll take you gently by the arm. The night is long, the dark is deep. Let us in and fall asleep. Hush now, don't you cry. We will find you by and by. Let us in and you will see.
You can never run from me.